السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساء الخير جميعا، أهلا بكم في برنامج نيوكاسل مع وليد. عودة بعد انتهاء سوق الانتقالات، طبعا مع ضيف مميز تعرفونه جيدا، الأستاذ الإعلامي والممثل ستيف ريث من نيوكاسل، صاحب قناة شؤون نيوكاسلية والممثل الإنجليزي المعروف. Lads and lasses, welcome to Steve Wraith. Steve Wraith in the house. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Alwaleed. Good to be back on your channel, and I hope everybody in Saudi Arabia is doing well. And happy National Day. I think that's in a couple of weeks' time. You keep me updated on these things. I hope everyone has a wonderful time and a nice holiday.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to have you on the show. It's season 7, Newcastle with Alwaleed. I believe it's the same with you, Steve. Do you believe that?
Yes, I mean, we've had such a long journey together, Alwaleed. I mean, we started, of course, in 2020 officially with NUFC Matters. We had done some early shows with Supermac before that as a bit of a test to see what people's reaction was. But yeah, I mean, solidly going now for 5 years, really, as a channel, and it's been a wonderful run. And I think the last time we spoke, Newcastle had just won a cup, just won the trophy, the Carabao Cup, and we were going into the back end of the season hoping that we would qualify for the Champions League, and we managed to do that, which is great. Second time in 3 years, and now we look ahead to what hopefully will be another successful campaign. Fighting in the Carabao Cup, of course, along with the Premier League, but also the Carabao Cup. We now enter the Carabao Cup against Bradford at the third round stage this month. And of course, in January, it'll be the FA Cup again. So it's a busy time for Newcastle. Plenty of games and a stronger squad, I believe.
Pardon?
We have a stronger squad.
Of course, we are happy to have the squad. Really excited for them. It's good we have choices, when we have someone from the bench, it will be excited, not just some maybe young lad or someone no, we have a chance that the one in the bench could change the result. Steve, before we going to deal with Newcastle, I'm curious about the movies, starting the movies. Any movie you are working soon?
I've been busy on stage. This year I've done 2 plays. I did a play called Blackbird in the Snow, where I played a medical consultant. So the way it works in England with theatre is you have 2 weeks rehearsal and then you perform the play. So we did 2 weeks performances. So 4 weeks work there. I then had 2 weeks off, 2 weeks holiday. And then I was in another play, a comedy play called Hard. And in that play, I played 9 different parts, believe it or not. There was a team of 5 people in the play. We all played multi-roles, but I played 9 different parts in that play. So, again, 2 weeks rehearsal, 2 weeks performance, but it was fantastic. And they were both in the northeast of England as well, so I didn't have to travel far to rehearse or to be in it, which is great. And as for films, yeah, I've got something on the horizon. I'm back in front of the cameras again in November at the moment, November the 26th and 27th. I've got a nice little part in a feature film, and potentially something again in December, which isn't confirmed yet by contract. But yeah, still keeping busy, Alwaleed, still working hard, and still enjoying life, still doing a little bit of writing, still doing the poetry, still doing the all the things that make me happy, and spending a lot of time with the family as well.
Brilliant, and you are always an ideal for me, sir. Wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Welcome. I gather many questions. I hope to from the fans and from myself to ask you, Steve, and we want to take this advantage of having you to have some perspective and some opinion about this question. Let's start with Darren Ailes.
Yeah.
With all thanks for him, out of 10 in general, how you evaluate his work?
Yeah, Darren Eales came to Newcastle United with a lot of plans and a lot of ambition, and he had a good CV. Of course, in his previous club, he had takes the credit for generating a lot of commercial income and generating funds to create a wonderful stadium and help progress a relatively new team in infancy compared to Newcastle. But as far as his time at Newcastle is concerned, he had ups and downs. I think anybody who comes into a football club like Newcastle United, I think, you can underestimate the size of the football club. And I think maybe Darren did to an extent. But, he came in and he communicated with supporters right at the start. He touched base with lots of different supporters. And he managed to, set up various meetings and stuff with supporters for in the UK with various fans groups. But for instance, Steve Hasty, myself, and Keith Patterson, we went and met Sarah Metcalf. We didn't meet Darren Eales. We put in a request to go and see Darren, and yes, we got a chance to meet the club, and yes, we got a chance to put our views forward, but we didn't get a chance really to meet Darren. I mean, I met Darren at the cup final. I met Darren at one of the strip launches. I had a chat with him on both occasions. But you're talking a 2-minute meeting. You're not talking about sitting down and chewing the fat or having a discussion with them about what we've gone through as supporters, what we feel would be beneficial for supporters and the club moving forward. And it's all about opinions, and I get it. Who am I for Darren to sit down with? But at the same time, I think there could have been a bit more of that. I think that was probably the disappointing thing with him. I didn't like the way that he conducted himself at a couple of public occasions. The one that really stands out is the Champions League draw, because for me, there's a time and a place for humour, and there's a time and a place for doing things like that. And his comment about, have you ever seen a Mackem in Milan? I just think it was ill-timed, and I didn't think it was right that he chose that moment to crack a joke, if you like. And I watched Jamie Rubin, when the Champions League draw was done this time round, and it was so professional. He really spoke well. He represented the club in the correct way, and I just think there was a lot to be said with the way Jamie put himself across. It's been tough, I guess, for Darren. We wish him well because of his bad health. He's been hit with an illness, a cruel illness, and obviously we hope that he gets well from that and makes a recovery. But I do feel that the appointments of Dan Ashworth, and subsequently Mitchell have probably been the undoing of him as a CEO as well. I think, had he not taken ill, I do feel that he may well have found himself living on borrowed time with the owners because of those decisions. The Saudis and PIF are the owners, majority owners, but they're not hands-on. Al-Ramayan doesn't sit at St James's Park and make decisions. He doesn't sit at St James's Park day after day. Because PIF is such a huge, a huge network of businesses that it has, and a huge network of sports that it's involved with, as well as other assets. Al-Ramayan has to go and look after all of that, and I guess from his perspective, he puts people in charge. We have a saying in England is, why have a dog and bark yourself? And I guess that really comes down to what I'm trying to say here is that PIF and Al-Ramayan have to take some responsibility because they haven't put the right people in charge. Hopefully David Hopkinson comes in and can run the club and do it to the best of his ability and have the same kind of success he's had at his previous positions and his previous jobs. So for me, Darren Eales, if I had to give him a mark out of 10, I'd probably say 6.5. I think we've had better CEOs, and I think he loses marks for the way that he conducted himself at the Champions League. I just think that as well, communication was there when things were going right, but when things were going wrong, he was nowhere to be seen. Now, that may well have had something to do with him not being well, or getting the bad news. I don't know, and if it was, then that explains it. But it did appear on the outset that, from our perspective, when things were going right, he was there, and when things were going wrong, he disappeared. David Hopkinson's comes in with a good CV, although he's never really been a CEO, on a regular basis. He's been more of a COO, and it'll be interesting to see how he does. I think they deliberately didn't bring him in before the end of the transfer window, because what they didn't want was the chief executive coming in, and the first thing that the chief executive is remembered for is Alexander Isak leaving. So I think the appointment was at the right time. He can now come in, and hopefully he will be the man who announces what is happening with the stadium. Hopefully he'll be the man who comes in and announces what is happening with potentially a stadium sponsor or with a training ground sponsor. Hopefully he's the man who gets the job of delivering good news stories. And that's really what Newcastle United fans want, because there has been lots of angst. There's been a lot of anxiety around the Isak situation, but it's fair to say that last season, despite us winning a trophy, lots of people were still mumbling and grumbling because there hasn't been an announcement about, the stadium or a new training ground. And that's what really has got people wound up and annoyed a little bit. So, yeah, Darren Neal, 6.5. If Peter Silverstone was going to get a mark, I'd give him the same, because, yes, he brought in sponsorships, and he brought in numerous sponsorships. I couldn't give you an exact figure, but for example, when you get the match programme at St James's Park, there are many, many more sponsors that have come in. So he's done the groundwork and brought in a lot of smaller sponsors. But when it actually comes to the ones which will make a difference with PSR, he hasn't done that. Now, you've got to ask, why is that the case? Why are Newcastle bringing in these kind of sponsors? Is he finding it difficult? We don't know, because there's no communication on that. So we'll wait and see. But listen, we should have really spent the summer being happy and revelling in the fact that we won the Carabao Cup, our first domestic trophy for many, many years. But unfortunately, it was all about Isak and the transfer window, and it soured the summer a little bit, Alwaleed.
Brilliant answer, and I could scratch a couple of questions here you are ahead. Steve, you mentioned the difficulty in sponsorship and the stadium. Also, George here asking, part of me believe it's something not in control of BIF completely. Maybe the Premier League holding back, and we didn't know about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard the news today that, the Man City case hasn't been announced yet. We don't know the results of that, but we know that the legal case that Manchester City took against the Premier League has now been settled out of court. There's been an agreement, to what to what Man City had challenged the Premier League on. Now that the Manchester City now have signed paperwork to say that they can't speak about it. So that really means that we'll never get an answer to that. So you would imagine that there's going to be some kind of answer come about the 100+ charges that the Premier League have put against Man City. So that's interesting. But with regards to the the money the money that's coming in, and PSR, Newcastle have had a major result with selling Alexander Isak. They spent 60 million plus on buying him. They've sold him for without having to pay the loyalty bonus, etc. They've sold him for, let's say, 130 million. Yeah, let's be conservative and say let's say they made 130 million. The amortization means that Newcastle will have money to spend in January, and almost certainly will have money to spend in the summer as well. So we've got a bit of breathing space with that. What does that mean with regard to other things at St James's? Like George said, do I think there'll be a new stadium, or do I think there'll be redevelopment at St James's Park? I think the new stadium is the route that the club want to go down, but I don't know whether there's any opposition to that from local residents. I don't know whether Newcastle are even thinking about extending St James's Park as a temporary measure. But I do imagine that David Hopkinson will be the man who gives us that news, and gives us that news sometime in the next few months. I can't see Newcastle going into another calendar year without giving us some kind of feedback on the stadium. So I still think Newcastle will build a new stadium. I still think Newcastle United want to build a stadium on Leazes Park. And I don't think Newcastle United want to redevelop St James's Park. I think the problems will lie in opposition. I think there will always be somebody who doesn't want you to build a new stadium on that park, on that piece of land. Nothing's changed in 25 years. People come and go, but I do think that the residents who are there, some of them will be happy with it and will be more than happy to change in exchange for financial recompense. But I think there'll be other people who will not want to leave that area, will not want that area touched, and that will cause an issue. I also think there'll be question marks over other things that maybe people haven't thought of, which is if there is a new stadium built and it is built on Leazes Park, who pays for the demolition of St James's Park? Because St James's Park will not be needed. So who knocks that down? Who pays the price for that? Because Newcastle don't own their own ground. That is leased. It's a 99-year lease, that ground. And, that means that the council really are responsible, I would have said, as the landlord for knocking down the stadium. So there needs to be an answer as to who pays for that. And I'm sure, I know that it's public knowledge. The council have got no money. The council haven't got much money at all, in fact. And, job cuts will tell you that. So for me, that could be an issue. There's so many different parts to this. And is there another part of the city or another part of the area where you could build? Well, of course there is. There's the town moor, there's Exhibition Park, but I still think you would get people who would object to that. Then you're talking about building it outside of the city, which of course, isn't going to be suitable. People who are staunch Newcastle fans won't want that, and business owners won't want that. They won't want to see the football club outside the city. So, that's a huge negative if that happens. So then does it go back to being a redevelopment of St James's Park, which financially doesn't make sense, because building on top of a construction like St James's Park, believe it or not, probably costs the Saudis and PIF more money to do that than it does to build a new stadium these days. So it's very interesting. We can see, I think, why it hasn't been made public knowledge, every single step of the way. I think what the Saudis will want to do is they want to come out and go, boom, there we go, it's happened. This is what's happening. They won't want to be giving it dribs and drabs. Brad Miller, I believe, the guy who was brought in last year, he helped develop I think it was the airport, or he's got speciality in that field. So one would imagine that he's the man who is still dealing with that kind of side of things, along with Peter Silverstone at the moment, and of course David Hopkinson. He's just took the job. He will be coming in and looking at everything. He will be looking at everything across the board, and seeing what needs to be done. And I've seen the publicity that David Hopkinson's had from the club, and it's positive. It seems positive. He seems the kind of man who will at least communicate. You've had an email from him already, from just on something which, let's face it, Alwaleed, is in his job remit. It's quite a minor thing to come and contact you direct, but he's done it. He came directly back to you, and from your perspective, that should be pleasing for you. And if he's done that to everybody who left an email in his inbox, then fair play to him. But yeah, it seems more positive. On the football front, Newcastle do need a new sporting director as well. Of course, that position I think has already been filled, and it's just a matter of time before the club announce it. So, if those people have come in and they do the jobs they're supposed to, hopefully the club is on a better footing. So it's interesting. I think you know, because you've done the podcast with me for the last 5 years on NUFC Matters. But the one thing that fans always want is communication. And since Amanda Staveley left the club, we haven't had somebody who's been good at communicating things to the supporters. Now, hopefully, David Hopkinson can do that. But I do think, and I will say it again, that Jamie Rubin should be used in that way as well. I think he should come out and speak more to the fans if needed. You know, we don't need him to come out every week, but if there's a situation develops, come out, give us the club's opinion and explain. Because the supporters don't really have any faith in the fans' advisory board. Supporters don't have any faith in the supporters trust, which of course is not linked to the club, but of course the Premier League the Premier League rules stipulate that the club needs to speak to the trust. I know some people do like the trust, maybe generalising too much there, but people would rather hear direct from the club. They don't want to hear from a fans representative who they haven't voted for. They want to hear direct from the club. So let's hear from David Hopkinson. Let's hear from Jamie Rubin when we need to.
You spoke about the good CVs of Darren Eales and also David Hopkins. Just a question came to my mind on why we bring, of course, they have good CVs, but why we bring him from America and Canada, which they are not having that. I think in America, I believe they have much flexible rules and management and the rules of the leagues and the sport. Comparing it to what we have or what in the Europe with the difficulties and the wave and the rules and obstacles.
I mean, I think it's just that he's got such a good CV in business, as far as football is concerned, Real Madrid are a team, or a club that Newcastle would love to be able to get to that level where they've been on a commercial level, on a business level, on a football level would be even better, of course, which is all the fans really concerned about. But he's got that commercial background there, and and working in that kind of industry, which is important. But the Americanization of the game is something that we've talked about on NUFC Matters for 5 years. We predicted this would happen. There are more and more people coming from America, Canada, coming into the Premier League, and it's no surprise to see Newcastle now having not an owner, of course, but just somebody in that kind of position. And I guess it's somebody who whose CV is good at. Darren Eales is completely different. Darren isn't American, of course. Darren is English, but he went out there and cut his teeth out there and did well. And I still don't say Darren Eales was a bad appointment. I just think, unfortunately, in football, things can sometimes just happen which you don't expect, and that can be football related, or it can be business related. Something might happen where somebody who you're close friends with suddenly makes a mistake and they're out and they're gone, and suddenly an appointment that you make, which everybody thinks is a good appointment, then turns out to be an appointment which is disappointing. And because you're the chief executive, you're the man in the firing line, and suddenly all of those people who were around you going, yeah, good appointment, they're now suddenly stepping back like Homer Simpson into the bush, going like that, and basically saying, "Oh, well, it wasn't my job. That was your job, that, Darren." So it's difficult, but that's why you get paid the big money. That's why you get paid the big bucks to be a CEO. But it comes down to PIF. They're the owners. They're the ones making the decisions. Who is making the decision to give Darren Eales the job? Who is given the decision? Who is given the job to David Hopkinson? It's PIF. It's not Jamie Rubin. Jamie Rubin's a minor shareholder, a smaller shareholder, still has 20%. But he can't have the majority say. So is it Al Ramayan? Is it the advisors who work here? There are people who are from Saudi who work in the UK on behalf of Al Ramayan, I guess, to tick the boxes. I often get a bit frustrated when people say, well, the PIF, if he's not sitting in an office at St James's Park, they're losing interest, and people start to say those kind of things. But in this modern day technology. You can pick up your mobile phone, you can switch on a computer. Like we're doing this podcast now when you're sitting in Saudi and I'm sitting in the UK. This is what happens in business. If Al Ramayan has to make a decision tomorrow about Newcastle and something needs to be sorted out, then he's contactable. You can pick the phone up, you can go on the computer. It's not as if he's not going to answer the call, because it's his job. It's his job to do that. So I just think though that it comes back to that adage that I used before. Why have a dog and bark yourself? That is why we need to get these appointments right. Hopefully Hopkinson is a good appointment. His CV says he will be. Hopefully the director of football, who is imminent, will be a good appointment and can do his job properly. And hopefully that leads us, to the next stage, because we've done well. Champions League for the last, 2 out of the last 3 years, 2 cup finals, and 2 of the last 3 years. We've won a cup final now. Things are great, Alwaleed, compared to where they were when we first started doing the podcast, and people should never forget that. Look at where we were and look at where we are now, and look at the money we've just spent in the transfer window. We're in the top 6 spenders this year. In this summer, after having 3 very quiet windows, we've now got a better squad. You could probably say technically, because we've lost Isaac's goals, we might have slightly weakened the team, but if Eddie Howe, as a coach, can get the best of Voldemort and the best of Wissa, we've replaced Callum Wilson, who sadly wasn't the player that we signed. And he was too well past his sell-by date for us anyway, for the job that Eddie wants him to do. And we've lost Isaac, but we brought in 2 other players who you would say Voldemort for Wilson, Wissa for Isaac. Hopefully can get the goals that we need, but we strengthened across the pitch. We brought in another goal. We've lost the goalkeepers we needed to get rid of. We got rid of. We brought in another ex-England goalkeeper, somebody who's looking to get back in the England squad in Ramsdale on loan. We needed a right-sided centre half. We brought in Malik Chow, who we tried to get a couple of seasons ago, and now we've got him. Somebody who Maldini rates very, very highly, and who Maldini's one of the best defenders I've ever seen. We needed a right winger to support Jacob Murphy. We brought Alanga in from Nottingham Forest, so we've weakened a team that was one of our rivals last year. We needed another midfielder, because when Joe Linton was out of the team last season, we suffered massively whenever he was missing. We've gone and weakened another one of our rivals by bringing in Jacob Ramsey, and we've also managed to achieve what we didn't think we were going to 2 weeks before the end of the window, and that is bring in Wissa and bring in Voldemort, who gives us a completely different option. So we've lost 2 centre forwards, we brought 2 in, and both younger and capable of doing a job. And let's not forget as well, we brought in Seung as well, the young Asian guy who is potential. We brought Cordero in right at the start of the window, who's gone out on loan, and we brought in a whole host of youngsters from around the globe. Brought a couple of signings in from Scotland as well. So we still recruited some young players, some youth, so that there is still potential. I think the biggest upset for me over the last couple of seasons, of course, has been losing Elliot Anderson, and I was delighted to see him, make his debut for England the other night, because I think we all knew he was going to be a decent player, but he's turned into a very good player. So that's probably the one upsetting thing, is that we had to let Minty and Anderson go, and Anderson is blossoming into a really, really good player, and he's a good asset to have, and we've lost him.
Brilliant, Steve. I want to ask you about a signing of David Hopkinson. Not in the end of the season, why in the beginning? But you already answered that. If I can ask you, name 3 matter or issues that must change, or the new CEO should start with as priority in Newcastle.
Well, the priority for me really is communication, which is better than it has been and has been for a long time. It can still improve. They need to improve communication, and if there's no update, just tell us there's no update on the ground. Do tell us that there's no update. Just say that the survey is still ongoing. We are still looking at both options, potentially building on St James's Park, redeveloping St James's Park, or building a new stadium. We are looking at a new venue for the training ground, but again, there's no positive outcome on that yet. Just tell us what's going on that score. It stops all the negativity. It stops all the chitter chat, and just something positive. Just come out with something positive. Communication is the key. Continue with what you're doing, but do it better. That's what I would say with communication. Tickets are always going to be something that people complain about, and I still think we have a huge problem with resale tickets. People who are clearly beating the system. People are getting tickets from somewhere and selling them at a premium on these internet sites. That needs to stop. Find out who's doing it and reprimand them, sack them, because somebody is taking tickets from somewhere and selling them on the black market, and that's wrong. This is why they've changed things and done things over the course of the first couple of years that they've been there. But nip that in the bud, because it's not fair and it's not right. And yeah, I think the new stadium and the training ground would be the third thing. Give us an update on that. It probably ties in with the communication, but let us know what is going on. Let us know what is going on with that. If there's an update, great. Tell us. If there's not, then let us know as well. But I don't think David Hopkinson will be disappointed when he comes in. I don't think he will say, what kind of club is this, or what a mess have we left? What mess has been left behind by people? But I do think as well that he's going to have to set things in motion slightly differently. Again, we don't have the capacity to hire lots and lots of staff. And I think when you go to a club like Manchester United, although they run at a massive debt, and have a massive debt which is written off by the owners, I think their staff, they've got lots more staff behind the scenes. I almost feel like sometimes it's a one-man show at Newcastle. You're the CEO, you've got lots of things to do. So I think, I just think, genuinely speaking, Alwaleed, that he needs a bit more help. He needs a bit more help.
Right, Steve. So communication and ticket and about information about the stadium and the sponsors. Coincidentally, I asked someone expert in Saudi Arabia regarding these matters. Of course, he's not Wayaif, but he said the price or the value of sponsor of the training, it wasn't that great numbers. But this is just was opinion for him. All right. Communication. Also, I am suffering from the communication from the club. Media work at the club. Sometimes the secrecy is understood and business, but I feel down, or I feel sad about. Are we? And now we're talking about season 7 and stuff, and the podcast, and I want to compare to before old days, Steve, especially when you were at the club, working with the club. Are we going to continue depending on Craig Hope, if we can call it that, as a leaks, and also you notice the sport media was ridiculously biased in Newcastle in the summer from Romano and etc. etc. Are we going to continue in this situation?
Yeah, because obviously, from our perspective, there's always going to be journalists who get a story and who essentially get a story before everybody else. And I think, it's one of those situations where Greg Hopes had one contact, Luke Edwards has had another contact, and they've then shared the stories with the social media Twitter account and we've decided to take up what we wanted to take. It's we're always going to be stuck with that, unfortunately, Alwaleed. We're always going to be stuck with that. And it depends who you follow. I follow Craig Hope. I've enjoyed his podcasts. I've enjoyed his updates. And I think he was right about a lot of the things that he came up with. But this happens all the time, Alwaleed. You're always going to get one journalist who gets a story, one journalist who gets a different story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. Romano, he's just a speculator. He's somebody who gets half a story, speculates it, and puts it out there. I won't go down the avenue that some people have done. Some people accuse, certain people have been paid to put stories out on behalf of clubs. I'd be very surprised if that happens, Alwaleed. I'd be very surprised if that happens. But, some people do believe that it does. Ben Jacobs has been accused of various things, and he comes and does our podcast on a regular basis. And I asked Ben, have you ever been paid by a Premier League club to put stories out? And he said, of course not. He says, and I think that's libelous. He says, what people are saying. And I asked him the question. Some people wouldn't even consider asking Ben that question, but I did, because he trusts me, I trust him, and we had a chat. But I do think a lot of people just make things up just to get traction and just to get a bite, Alwaleed.
Steve, sorry to interrupt, but it seemed like we fighting the media or the bad media against us, this biased media, with silence. I'm speaking about the club and the PIF. I'm worried about, when just you hear the negatives news, all the negatives, and nothing from the club side or PIF side. As you said, we don't want them to come every day when it needed. But I'm worried that the fans, if they keep hearing only a bad or negative side, unfortunately, in the end, they will believe it, or some part of it.
Well, the difference is when we go out and socialise, if you go to, go for a meal or go for a coffee or go to a pub in England, you have a conversation with a Newcastle fan. It's not like social media, I believe, but on social media, it's a minority of supporters. Doesn't always need to be a Newcastle fan. It can be somebody who's just trying to cause mischief in pretend to be a Newcastle fan and say something to cause all of that stir online. We saw the situation with Isaac. His agent, clearly runs his social media accounts, and he was putting, things out there. It's a different world we live in now. You've got to separate fact from fiction. You've got to work out who's telling the truth and who isn't. I think a lot of fans have been disappointed that that there hasn't been more of a statement from PIF. I mean, we're 5 years into the relationship, if you like, now. We're 4 years into the relationship, 4.5 years in, whatever. And there hasn't been a great deal of communication. I'll remind you, it comes to the first game and the last game. We don't get a lot of communication from PIF generally, and I think that needs to change. I remember Ben Jacobs saying this in 2021. Would love to hear from PIF. We've put in requests. Would like to speak to them. I don't know why they don't communicate. I don't know why we don't hear a great deal. We've heard from the chairman, though. We've heard from Mr. Alwaleed. He's come out. He said he wants to be number one. He wants to do this. He wants to do that, and that's great. We need more of that. We need to hear more of that. But again, third time I've said it. Why have a dog? Why have a dog and bark yourself? That's why they put a chief executive into place. It's the chief executive's job to represent the club and speak on behalf of the club and put the message across. PIF and the owners, they decide what they want to do, and they don't want to communicate. We don't hear from the Glazers at Manchester United on a regular basis. You don't hear from John Henry at Liverpool. So why would Alwaleed speak on a regular basis? We hear more from Mr. Alwaleed than those two clubs I've mentioned here from their owners. So Manchester United have Sir Jim Ratcliffe in position to talk on behalf of the owners. So it's no surprise, but rumours will always be part of, being a football fan. You will always have that kind of story developing and coming out and going round. There's nothing we can do about it. And managers, scouts, agents, all choose to go and speak to certain journalists. It's the nature of the beast. So when Steve Bruce was at Newcastle, he had people who were good friends with him. He knew Ian Murdoch very well from the Daily Star. He knew Luke Edwards very well. So they got back stories, and that's the way it works. Craig Hope has clearly got a good relationship with the club, somebody at the club. So he can come out and speak with confidence on various matters. So you're never going to get the true picture, the exact picture. You're going to get one person's view when you're speaking to somebody. When somebody's reporting from the club, they're speaking to somebody at the club, you're going to get one person's view. And if it's negative stuff, then, that's what happens.
Interesting, Steve. Also, I would like to ask about not just BF, I believe also Jimmy Rubin. He's not appearing like before. Is it something agreeable, you think? It's just opinion. Your opinion, Steve. Is it... I understand, and I know they are working in silence, but this is not maybe make us happy. But we notice after strong appearance, we notice that now it's very limited. In your opinion, why? What's the benefit of this?
Well, why don't we hear anything from
less communication like before from the BIF and Jimmy Rubin?
I just genuinely think we don't hear a great deal from the club because they see the job really falling to the chief executive, and we haven't had a chief executive. I think it's as simple as that. So, from our perspective, if we had a chief executive, they would be the one speaking. But Darren Eales has been very ill, been in hospital. He continued his job longer than he probably should have done, but he has been the person who was given that job, and he hasn't been able to communicate. So I think Jamie Rubin was sent as the representative from the club for the Champions League draw, and that's why we heard from him. I don't think it's anything other than that. As for His Excellency Al Rahmani, we hear from him occasionally, but we don't hear from him a great deal. But that's because he feels, I'm sure, that is not his job.
Brilliant. I didn't want to talk about Isaac. It was very boring. We had enough this, but I just want to quickly have your opinion on what do you think. Okay, it's two-part question. 130 million. Who wins, us or Liverpool? And what do you think happens last night of the transfer window?
I mean, I think it was a win for Newcastle, and it was a win for the player. The player got his move. It was player power. He didn't want to stay at Newcastle. He wanted to move to Liverpool. He clearly had discussions of some sort with somebody, which had turned his head. And I think that, the sad part was that he was saying that he hadn't, promises had been broken. Promises aren't worth anything unless they're on paper. And he didn't have anything in writing to say that he could, that he was going to get paid this money, etc. But clearly something's happened, and that's why, he became unsettled. And an unsettled player is no good to anybody. If a player is unsettled and doesn't want to be at the club, what can you do? So the biggest disappointment was that it went to the last day. And, we could have done with this being arranged and sorted at the start of the transfer window, because it spoilt a lot of fans' summers, and that was disappointing. So for me, I think the player won, and I think Newcastle won. I think Liverpool have spent a lot of money on a player that they didn't need. They signed Ekitike, and they don't need Isaac. He's the same style and the same kind of player. I think Arne Slot's got big problems because, obviously injury and suspension can change things, but I just genuinely think, who does he play? At the moment, he can't drop Ekitike. Ekitike is doing very well. Yes, all those competitions, you need squad rotation, but I just think it'll be difficult. I think it will be very difficult to keep all of those players happy. It's not our problem. I was happy with our transfer window, and I think I said at the start of the programme very happy. Newcastle strengthened across the squad, and I can't take credit for what Steve Hasty said on the Amigos last Wednesday. But I agree with what Steve said, which was, we strengthened the squad. We've got a stronger squad, but we slightly weakened the team by losing Isaac's goals. However, by the end of the season, if Wissett scored 20 goals and Voldemar had scored 10 and set 10 goals up, then it'll that's where the proof will be that Newcastle have had a really good window. But overall, I'm happy. We've got money to spend in January again, and we'll have money to spend next summer. So Newcastle have managed to, do well, I think, in the acquisition of Isaac. He helped us win a trophy. He helped us get back into the Champions League. Now he's gone. He's part of history. We move on. And I don't agree with Exonia taking him out of history. Listen, he scored the winning goal in the cup final. He should always be remembered for that. It's sad the way that he left. It's no different really to the way that Andy Cole left and others have left in the past. But we move on. He's part of our history now. But yeah, good transfer window, Alwaleed. I'm very happy, and I think that Newcastle squad is a lot stronger.
And I like the idea of Isaac and Ekitike was our target, or we're thinking ahead before Liverpool about combining these players, and hopefully, of course, that's make us feel better or relaxed that we choose good players. The word not for sale, was it for real? That was the plan, or just to get the highest price for Isaac, as many clubs do, not for sale?
Again, that's only a question that PIF can answer. The chairman said he wasn't for sale. I think they were very annoyed and very angry about the way that it was done. Nobody will ever know the true story behind it. There was lots of allegations to suggest that he was tapped up, and that that Liverpool only made the bid because they didn't want to be accused of this and then go through a court case. We'll never know. I think all we know is that the player's head was turned. He didn't want to stay at Newcastle United, and you can't keep an unhappy player. So from our perspective, we just got we got the best money for him. A lot of people were saying, "Oh well, Liverpool have managed to get a bargain. It was 150 million, and we've taken 130. 150 million was made up by social media. It was made up by the press. Nobody from the club said we want 150 million pounds. That was what we felt was market value as fans. People just clutched that out of the air. But you know what? 130 million and not having to pay me separation fee. Good deal for Newcastle. Very happy, but not for sale. No, I mean Darren Eales had come out a year earlier and said everyone's got that price, and unfortunately, that's what happens in football.
This season, what's your expectation in the Champions League, in the Premier League, Carabao Cup, FA Cup?
I still think Newcastle will win something this season. I said right at the start of the season, I felt that we had a good squad. I think we've got a better squad now. I think Newcastle will finish fifth finish in the top five, but I think fifth place is the best we will get, which hopefully will get us Champions League. And I think we'll win a cup. I've took us to win the FA Cup this year, so I'm still very confident. But if Newcastle were to win the Carabao Cup again, I wouldn't be disappointed. I think they will qualify to the next stage of the Champions League. It's difficult. 8 games though, some great games, some great ties. But yeah, fifth in the league, Newcastle to win the FA Cup, and Newcastle qualify for the next stage of the Champions League, but go out then.
Yeah, Barcelona game is very exciting. And what's that brings you from memories?
Memories, yeah. I mean, I was a young Newcastle fan back in 1997-98 season, and I remember that game very well. I was doing an interview at the pitch side, and Louis van Gaal came past me when I was doing that interview. I remember that it was a transitional period. Kevin Keegan had left. Kenny Dalglish was manager. But I also remember Tino Asprilla was a bit of an enigma back in those days. And that game, he wasn't actually supposed to play. But Keith Gillespie had one of the best games I've ever seen him play in a black and white shirt. And as Wolf quite rightly says, Tino got a hat-trick. And it's a night we'll always remember. But what I remember most about that night was that Newcastle United could have almost drawn that game, because the second half, what people forget is Barcelona were excellent. And in the dying embers of the game, they hit the bar, which would have meant it was 3-3. But Newcastle were out on their feet, very tired in the second half. And could have easily drawn or lost that game. But we didn't. We won 3-2. It's part of Geordie folklore, and it's a game I was pleased to be at.
Great info, Steve. We are really pleased to have you on the show, and you answered all our questions and more. We much appreciate it. Thank you much, Steve.
Always a pleasure, Alwaleed, and look forward to seeing you again on any UFC matter soon, mate. Take care, inshallah.
Thank you, Steve. طبعا كان معنا ستيف ريث الإعلامي والممثل الإنجليزي. حلقة جميلة طبعا تحدث فيها عن الكثير من الأمور التي تخص نادي نيوكاسل، خصوصا في الفترة الأخيرة. بالتوفيق لنادي نيوكاسل. نشكركم للمتابعة. Thank you for watching us. Thanks Steve again and good night.